All right, hello everybody. So today we are going to continue our discussion in solving inequalities, but this time these are going to be substantially harder than the last ones that we did. So in the last chapter in section 1 and 2, we solved pretty much one-step inequalities. Weren't too difficult. Introduced what you need to do with the sign if you multiply or divide by a negative, and fairly simple, straightforward things in that chapter and two sections. Now, in this section, we're going to be doing, or we're going to be solving multi-step linear inequalities. And so, as you can see, these are quite a bit more involved than the ones that we solved in the last couple of videos. So, let's get started. These ones are going to be done in pretty much the same manner. There's just more steps involved, which is why they're called multi-step inequalities. And so looking at my inequality, the first thing I'm going to do is draw my line, and then I'm going to identify what my variable is. In this case, the variable is y, and I'm going to see what is happening to that y. So there's a couple things happening. That y is being multiplied by negative 11. It is also being subtracted by 13. And so we need to undo both of those things. We need to undo that multiplication of negative 11, and we need to undo the subtraction of 13. And the way that we're going to do that first is we're going to add 13 to both sides. So we're going to add 13 here, and then we're going to add 13 here. And if you recall, we've solved similar multi-step equations. And again, I'm going to reiterate, the only difference between these and multi-step equations is that if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative, you need to flip the inequality sign. That's it. That's the only difference. So once we add 13 to both sides, these cancel. I still have a negative 11y, and it's still a greater than, and then I'm left with 55 on the right-hand side. Now, following that first step, you can see that there's still a negative 11 that is multiplying the y. So we need to get rid of that negative 11 multiplying. And in order to undo multiplication, we are going to divide by negative 11 on both sides. And when I divide by negative 11 on both sides, on the left-hand side, this cancels. I'm left with just y. On the right-hand side, it is going to be negative 5. But keep in mind, we divided both sides of the equation by a negative. And so when we divide both sides by a negative, you need to flip the sign over. And so what we end up with for a final answer is y is less than negative 5. So not too bad. That was a two-step one. These definitely get more difficult. As you can see here in this number 2, there's a lot going on in this problem. So let's talk about that for a second. I'm going to draw my line. So we keep the sides separate. And you're going to see why that's more important in a problem like this. Here's the biggest issue. We have a variable on this side, and we have a variable on this side. So when you have variables on two sides of the inequality, one of the goals is to get all the variables over to one side because we are trying to solve for them. But you can't do that until you look at each side individually and determine whether there's anything to do. So I highlighted the first side in green and the second side in orange to let you see the difference between the two sides. Now, if you look at this side in orange right here, there's nothing to do. The 8t and the 3 are not like terms, so they cannot be combined. However, if you look in this side, there is still numbers that need to be cleaned up. Or there are still numbers that need to be cleaned up before you should be trying to move anything from one side of that red line to the other. And so that's the most important thing that I want to stress about these multi-step equations or inequalities is to break them up into parts and deal with one side individually at a time until both the sides are simplified separately. Then you can go about solving for your variable, moving your variable to one side. So let's look at that. There's a 4 right here that needs to distribute to both things in the parentheses. So I'm going to distribute that 4 to the 3t, and I'm going to distribute that 4 to the 5. And what I end up with is 12t minus 20. Now we still have that plus 7 there, And then our inequality sign, which is a greater than or equal to, and then 8t plus 3. Now, the left-hand side over here is still not cleaned up. And the reason why it's not cleaned up is there are two like terms right here that can be combined. Those two numbers need to be combined. Negative 20 plus 7 is negative 13. So I'm going to write 12t minus 13 is greater than or equal to 8t plus 3. Now, if we look at the left-hand side, those two terms are not like terms, therefore they can't combine. The right-hand side has been, since the beginning, already simplified as far as it could go. But what I want you to notice is the left-hand side is neat and clean and orderly, and the right-hand side is neat and clean and orderly. So there are no simplification to be done between the sides themselves individually. So now we're going to move all the variables to one side. So you can see there's a 12t here and there's an 8t there. Another thing to keep in mind is we like the variable to be on the left-hand side. And as a matter of fact, I even stated that I want your final answer to have the variable on the left-hand side. So that means we're going to take this 8t and we're going to move it over here. But in order to move something from one side of the line to the other, you either have to add or subtract it. And so I'm going to subtract 8t right here. I'm going to subtract 8t right here. And I'm going to get 4t minus 13 is greater than or equal to 3. Now, following that, we are going to get rid of, you can still see that this t has two things happening to it. It has this 4 and it has this negative 13. We need to undo both of those. We're going to get rid of the 13 first by adding 13 to both sides. And then I'm going to have 4t is greater than or equal to 16. And lastly, I'm going to divide both sides by 4. And I'm going to get t is greater than or equal to 4. And there is our final answer. T is greater than or equal to 4. So as you can see, that has a lot more steps than the problems that we were doing in the last section of notes, which was 5.1 and 5.2. Okay, moving on to number 3 and number 4. We have 2 more to go here for this video. So once again, solving multi-step equations. This equation is not nearly as messy as the last one. I am going to draw a line right down here. And I'm going to notice my variable right here, m. It is being multiplied by 2/5. It is also being added to 7. So we need to undo both of those. And the first thing that we're going to undo is we are going to undo the 7. I'm going to back up for a second. We are going to undo the 7, but what I want you to see is the left-hand side, there's nothing that we can do on that side by itself. Same with the right-hand side. There's nothing to do over there. So now we can proceed to move things from left to right. So we're going to, or right to left, depending on what we're doing. In this case, we're moving right to left because I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. When I do that, I get negative 16 is greater than or equal to 2/5 m. Now that 2/5 m is multiplying, that 2/5 is multiplying the m. So to undo that, we would normally do division, but we don't divide fractions. So it's a keep, change, flip problem. We're going to multiply this side by 5/2, and then we're going to multiply this side by 5/2. These cancel, and I'm left with m on this side. And over here, I need to make this negative 16/1. And then I'm going to reduce the 2 and the 16. They each get divided by 2. And so I have 5 times negative 8, which is negative 40. And 1 times 1 is 1, so we don't need to worry about the bottom. So there, we have negative 40 is greater than or equal to m. But here's our problem. Once again, that m needs to be first. I want you to list your final answer so the variable's first. So we have to flip everything around, including the sign. And you can see that our final answer we end up with is m is less than or equal to 40. So now the last one that we're going to do is I'm going to distribute. Let me back up. Draw my line first. Okay. Then I want you to look at the left-hand side. Left-hand side. There is work to be done there. We need to distribute this 2 to both things. Look at the right-hand side. There is still work to be done there. We are going to distribute the -3 to both things. So you do need to distribute and clean up the left-hand and the right-hand side first before you move things from side to side. So 2 times h is 2h, and 2 times 6 is 12. Then we have -3 times 8, which is -24. And then we have -3 times h, which is positive 3h. So I distributed on the left, I distributed on the right. Then I'm going to check, are these like terms and can they be combined? The answer is no. On the right, are these like terms and can they be combined? Once again, the answer is no. So what we're going to do is we are now going to get our variables all to one side. And so you can see there's a 2h and a 3h. We do want our variables to end up on the left-hand side, so we might as well move that 3h over by subtracting 3h from both sides. And when I do that, I get -1h plus 12 is greater than -24. Now we're going to subtract 12 from both sides. I have -h is greater than -36. And then I'm going to divide both sides by -1. Now there's the key thing. I'm dividing both sides by a negative. Therefore, when I write my final answer, the sign gets flipped over and you get h is less than 36. And there is your final answer. So that is the last example I have for you in this video. Thank you for watching. And as always, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Have a great day.